Now, this is geopolitics. We have no real clue how this will play out. That's why it's so hard. Economic events are much more forecastable. Geopolitical events have many more different nuances, and you have to use that kind of decision tree structure to assess probabilities of all of the things that could happen and trying to figure out, okay, how do I protect myself? Can I make money out of this? What does this all mean for the much bigger picture? So there's a lot here. So let's dig in quickly to where we are now. There are, as ever, in geopolitical disputes, two sides of a story. And when you're trying to analyze geopolitics, you need to be aware of both. So then you can understand what is propaganda, who you're being told by what person for whatever reason. And in this situation, we know Russia's been very clear on its intentions to buffer its borders. Peter Zeihan's piece the other day made it very clear. I think D. Smith's gone through this, and most of the geopolitical strategists we've had on Real Vision have also looked at this. So Russia's been very keen on stopping NATO encroaching on its borders. NATO, on the other hand, is very keen on not letting Russia encroach on its borders, but it's been moving NATO's way. And this whole game has been played out for some period of time. I've written this up in GMI and written it up in Macro Insiders, or Real Vision Pro Macro, is this whole situation that we saw started with Chechnya, then moved to Crimea. This Ukraine story was the Crimea story. Then it's these splintering states. Then it's Ukraine itself. It's been a story that the Russians have had an obsession with in how they want to deal with it for their own sovereign protection. And I don't want to go into the geopolitics of who said what to whom and why. That's not relevant right now. What's relevant is trying to figure out where we are. So I think we have a very narrow window, maybe 2 weeks, maybe less, which is that the Russians have surrounded Kiev pretty much. Now, we understand that the supply chains are not good, but we also understand the Russians have done this a lot of times before with bad supply chains. It's pretty common, and sheer brute force is how they do it. So they're surrounding Kiev now, and what happens in the next few days or couple of weeks is vital. You can see the Israelis have been negotiating on both sides. Maybe there's a negotiation to be had here, and the negotiation will be something like, and again, we don't know because this is geopolitics, and there's a lot of different national pride and a lot of consideration, global consideration, all in this. But let's assume that they can agree a ceasefire, agree some sort of splitting up of Ukraine. So they allow the splinter states. Then maybe they say, well, the government can move and have its own Ukraine, but over towards the west side. And the Russians put a new government in eastern Ukraine. They have West Ukraine, East Ukraine. Something of that sort kind of solves a lot of the problems, although obviously it's still not a good situation. And we'll come on to the big picture still later. But that could see a de-escalation. If we can find some variation around that, where the Ukrainians themselves get some sovereignty, they may lose some sovereignty, or they keep sovereignty of the whole country, but a puppet government gets put in, and the splinter states go to Russia, in which case they're kind of surrounding Ukraine anyway with Crimea as well. That, to me, is something where sanctions get not dropped, but eased off over a period of time, because everybody feels like that they've negotiated a settlement and therefore Russia can be rewarded with something. That's the best possible case scenario that I see right now. It's not my highest probability case either. Case number 2 is that the Ukrainians don't negotiate, don't surrender, and the Russians level Kiev, which I think is the highest probability case. Again, I find it really tough to assess the probabilities, but in my mind, that's what I think the most likelihood is. Then the Russians say they've got 2 choices. One is to keep Ukraine as Ukraine, or the other thing they've been threatening is take away its sovereignty, which is Russia takes over Ukraine. They either put in a puppet government, it might be too late for that now, or they take it over. Okay, that is a bad situation, a really bad situation, because clearly sanctions are not going away. NATO is going to amass weapons and defenses on the borders. Tensions are going to be extremely high, and the food crisis is going to be writ large. So in scenario A, the food crisis still happens. We still go into a global recession. I think that's almost a certainty now. We were going there anyway And now this is exacerbating it, and that's not going to go away. I think we're going to miss the harvest season in Ukraine. I don't think there's going to get a chance to harvest when you're at war, and then the planting season gets missed as well. Then we got the situation with fertilizers, etc. It may be a very difficult agricultural season globally. So that's one. On the second situation, if the sanctions are in place longer, now we've got a full splintering of supply chains that has to happen, and it's forced to happen in a period of time. That is a nightmare situation where Peter Zeihan's world of really dramatically increased food prices leading to civil unrest, crime, all of the things on a global basis is pretty likely. That's really ugly. What that can do for the Middle East, what it can do at other countries. I mean, I'm in Utah right now, and the taxi driver, I always chat to the taxi driver, and I asked him where he's from. He said, Sri Lanka. I said, how's things in Sri Lanka? And he said, terrible. I said, why, what's going on? He said, well, people are out in the streets rioting or protesting. There's massive queues outside the gas stations. I said, yeah, gas prices are high. He goes, well, that's not the issue. The issue is the government's run out of dollars to pay for them. So they just didn't buy enough gas. So there's not enough gas for the country. These are the kind of linkages that happen in situations like this. If Russia remains out of the global system, which looks increasingly likely, then we probably have a big liquidity problem. And that spits around the world in various ways, whether it's countries who are trying to get access to dollars, banks trying to get access to dollars, or whether it's credit spreads widening as people pull back, trying to assess the risks that are going on. And we don't really know. I mean, how does this affect Egypt? How does this affect the Middle East at large? How does it affect all sorts of countries? Again, we don't really know yet. But that's a hugely concerning moment, and that's a big global recession if that takes place, and a massive monumental geopolitical shift as the world really is forced to separate out. China starts separating out. And again, we'll come to a bit more of that in a sec. Scenario 3 is the worst case, which is, I think that Russia has made it clear that if you oversupply Poland with weaponry to give to Ukraine, then they're going to consider Poland as part of the war. This is Peter Zeihan's point about a potential invasion of Poland. I put that at a low probability, but what the hell do I know? If that is the case, then okay, this is now the worst case situation, because this is NATO versus Russia in a full war. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying these words, but that's where we are, and it's kind of shocking and terrifying. The issue I have with all of this, and I had underestimated it, is the knock-on effects are much larger than I first realized. That how things can spiral in very few decisions into something utterly terrifying that we've not had to face, certainly in our lifetimes, and certainly not in the West. Other regions have, obviously. So it's kind of on tenterhooks. The next 2 to 3 weeks, we will find out whether we have scenario 1, scenario 2, and then after that would be, will scenario 3 come into play?